Okay, hello YouTube audience. We're here live for this week's car tour. I'm Jonathan Yarconi, the managing editor of Driving.ca. And with me today, we've got Andrew McCredie, our resident EV expert and host of the Plugged In podcast, which deals with all manner of things EVs. So we've got something plugged in for you today, and we'll be talking about that a little bit later, but just want to give people time to show up and get familiar. At any point, if you guys have questions for Andrew about his cars, past or present, you can put them in the chat. If you'd like to follow us on social media, you can check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, as well as here on YouTube. We publish regularly, so you'll be seeing a lot of material from videos, as well as written articles that you'll find on Driving.ca. So subscribe here to get notified of our videos, but also check out our website where we're publishing lots and lots of fresh content daily, keeping up to date with all the latest car news, as well as a lot of classic car stuff and the larger world of cars. But let's take a minute. Andrew, why don't you say hi to our audience?
Hello, Jonathan, and hello, audience from cold and rainy Vancouver.
Well, that's the way Vancouver is in the West Coast is supposed to be, right?
I guess so. It is a rainforest.
Yeah, well, we could definitely use some of that rain and that cool air right now because it's scorching here in the Toronto area.
Well, just shows you how big this country is.
Absolutely, yeah. How many days would it take if we were to actually get together and do this in person?
One day.
But anyway, let's start off. While people are still waiting to join, the main topic of today's car tour is going to be the Volvo XC60 plug-in hybrid that Andrew's driving this week. But before everyone shows up, and if they've got questions, I'll give them time. But first of all, let's hear about what some of your car history has been like, Andrew. What was your first car?
Well, just to prove that a leopard can change its spots now that I'm an EV guy, my first car when I was 16 was a 74 Gran Torino. So that was a muscle car of the day, 351 4-barrel Windsor engine. So I've come a long way, I suppose. That was pretty sweet. Yeah, everybody, all my friends back then had, through high school, had muscle cars in Sarnia, Ontario. So,
man, I had my own 2 feet for high school, so I'm pretty jealous of that.
Yeah.
I had
that
was nice.
You know what? Gasoline, this was 1980. Gasoline and insurance wasn't what it is today, so it was manageable.
Yeah, no, it was a great era for cars, but it's a great era for cars today now too. Everything is changing. Before we get to today's cars, I'm going to ask you what the favorite car you've ever owned is.
Well, I think there were probably two, and they're quite different cars. So one of those was a car, I mean, probably still my favorite car is the Porsche 911. Had a little toy as a kid, and I think that beautiful shape somehow got ingrained in my brain, and I've always loved it. So there you see me with my, that was a 1971 911T.
Man,
and that's
beautiful car, beautiful color.
Yes, it was beautiful. So it was that was 1993. I bought that, and I owned that for 8 years. 8 years.
Do you regret selling it? How much would it be worth today?
Yeah, you know, I mean, you can think about that. I think I bought it for about 11,000 and I sold it for about 11,000. So I was quite happy with that, considering I had it for 7 years. I would imagine now it's probably worth about 4 or 5 times that, but I don't dwell on the past. You know, I had 7 good years in it, and kind of fulfilled my dream of owning one and driving one. And I love that era because it didn't have the rubber bumpers. It was, you know, very, very simple. And especially out here on the coast, driving that up to Whistler on the Sea to Sky Highway on a nice sunny morning was like going back in time.
That's a pretty sweet ride. Any other notable cars in your history?
Okay, well, the second one is also a German vehicle, but as I said, it's kind of diametrically opposed to the Porsche, and that was a 1974 VW Westphalia camper.
Oh, you sent me a picture of this thing. Oh, yeah, look at that beauty.
So that was my wife, well, my girlfriend at the time, Karen, who you can kind of see in the background there, her and I drove out from Toronto in 1990 when we moved to Vancouver. And I'm happy to say she's still my wife, or now my wife. Unhappy to say that vehicle's not in the family anymore. Had that for about 5 or 6 years, but it was, I mean, for coming out to BC with no little money and things, that's us surfing into Fino. So it was a real West Coast vehicle, and we did a lot of road trips, went down the coast to see the Grateful Dead in Las Vegas and Oregon. And yeah, I still, every time I see one, I get a twinge, because they're so unique, and they're so utilitarian, and you can do so much with them. It was a great vehicle.
So one of our other editors, Nick Trigianis, he wants to know, do you still have that jacket, Andrew?
I don't think I still have that jacket, but I might. I'll look for it, Nick, and I'll send it out to you. It'll probably fit you.
Yes, Nick's quite the jacket aficionado, so of course he wants to know all about that.
I didn't realize that.
Anyhow, moving on from cars you've driven in your past, I'm curious to hear, what are you driving today?
Okay, so as you said at the top here, I'm in the 2020 Volvo XC60 T8 all-wheel drive Polestar engineered.
That's a lot of numbers and letters.
Yeah, they can't fit that name on the back of the car, even though it is a crossover. So why don't I just hop outside here, and I'll kind of give you a little tour of it.
Yeah, let's check it out. Let's hear about it.
Okay, hang on. All right. So just not to lie, there's downtown Vancouver. It is raining. So I'll show you what this thing looks like. So there she is.
Yeah. What size are those wheels?
Those are the optional. So the Polestar engineered vehicle comes with 21 inches. Those are 22-inch.
Wow.
Forged alloy wheels. They are awesome. And then you've got the nice yellow Akibono brakes in there. Of course, yellow is kind of a Polestar color, so that's maybe you noticed when I was sitting in the car that it had yellow seatbelts. So that's the other thing there.
Nice accent.
So, you know, it's just your classic, you know, crossover, mid-size crossover, I guess. But it is unique in that it's you know, got a supercharged engine, a turbocharged engine, and a hybrid package. So it goes pretty well.
So, Andrew, what do you like most about the XC60 so far?
Sorry, what's that?
What do you like most about the XC60 so far as you've been driving it?
Well, I mean, it's so when it's fully charged up, when the hybrid system's charged up, you get 40 kilometers of all electric driving. So, I mean, it's fantastic. It's smooth, it's quiet, it's fast. I mean, for all intents and purposes, at that level of charge, it's an all electric. So it has all those attributes of a luxury all electric.
Have you been seeing
even
that
when the engine kicks in?
Have you been seeing that you get?
Sorry, go ahead.
Do you get 40 actual kilometers, or is that the estimate that they've given?
I've had it twice up to full charge. Once I had 37 and once I had 43. But again, obviously that comes to how you're driving. The 37 was I took it on the highway for a bit. So obviously getting up to speed and on ramps and things, you kind of burn the battery more. But around town, I bet if you drove this, you know, aware of what you were doing, you could maybe squeeze that to 45 in the city. So that's pretty manageable, you know. I mean, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah. So how is the speed? How is the power though? If it is the T8 Polestar,
it is. So it's It's got a combined horsepower of 415.
Wow, that's
So
plenty.
328 of that come 328 of that come from the 2-liter engine, supercharged and turbocharged, and then the remainder comes from the single electric motor. And then in terms of torque, I mean, because you've got that electric assist, it's 494 pound-feet of torque.
Wow.
So I mean, this thing is not this. What's that? Do you want me to start it up?
Yeah, I'm curious. Does it sound? I mean, I guess it would start off silent, but does it have when you're going full tilt? Does it sound good, or does it sound like just a small engine working hard?
I think it sounds okay. It's not, you wouldn't think it's 400 plus horsepower, maybe if it roared by you. But again, I mean, they're not going for the loud sound. They're going more for the
no Gran Torino, I guess, right?
It is no Gran Torino, or for that matter, a Westphalia.
So we've got an interesting question from Nick Marinese. He's asking, would you ever drive an EV conversion of like a 911 or a Gran Torino or something like that?
I have actually driven a EV version of a Westphalia, of all things.
Oh.
And it's cool. I mean, one of the fun things about owning those kind of vehicles is the gears, going through the gears, the engine. I mean, certainly a 911, there's nothing to replace that flat six sound. So iconically Porsche. So I don't know. I like the fact that people do that with those vehicles, but I don't think I'd ever want to really own one or even spend a lot of time in one.
So if you were to pick your own EV from what's available on the market, what's the EV you would pick?
Well, that's a tough one. I mean, I think what's most exciting is where we're at in the next year or two with EVs. I think there's going to be some ones that really, I won't say put a big dent in Tesla right away, but certainly get people who might not have thought of buying an EV buying one. The Ford Mach-E is one. The Volvo XC60 Recharge, I think, is going to be an extremely nice vehicle. The Polestar 2, which is, of course, the kind of offshoot of the Volvo brand, a brand on its own now. That'll be out by the end of the year, or if not sooner. I haven't driven those, obviously. So what is out there now that I've driven? I would say, I really like the Nissan Leaf Plus. I mean, I drove the first gen Nissan Leaf 10 years ago, had one for 6 months. So I've kind of got a soft spot for the Leaf. I just think it's an excellent vehicle. But again, the Hyundais, the Kias, it's tough to pick one, really.
You go for something practical and small.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the I-Pace
That's where the
would be
maximum
nice.
efficiency is, right? Even though, the Teslas have the range, they're still using more power and they're less actually efficient, aren't they?
Yes, that's for sure. But as you say, they have a battery technology that will give you more range. So it's a bit of a trade-off there. And quite frankly, when you're driving one of these vehicles, it's more about just managing, what your daily kilometer output is, and if it fits into that window, it doesn't matter if it gets 600 or 400. You're not going to touch that. It's only when you go on a road trip that maybe that would factor in.
Okay, what's getting back to the Volvo XC60? What's your favorite aspect of the interior of the XC60?
Well, I mean, it's a Volvo interior, and up until a few years ago, Volvo seemed to be going backwards. I won't say they were dead in the water, but their latest design language on the inside and outside in the last few years has just leapt them over the competition. In my feeling, I think their interiors are among the best. What are the best are their seats. Their seats are absolutely incredible. I don't know if you can see that there.
They look nice too. I know the Volvos I've driven, they've felt great too.
Yeah, they're well bolstered. They're beautiful. And I mean, another thing you can see there's the yellow seatbelt I mentioned. The screen is really nice. It's a vertical screen, which I don't know. I'm getting used to. But just the whole intuitive package of the screen and how everything runs through that is really well done. I like them a lot.
With the Volvo myself, I never quite gotten around to to embracing it. Maybe it takes some more time. I'm curious, does this one have the crystal shifter?
It does not.
Oh, okay. Because in the XC90s, that's one of the things. It's a real elegant piece. Some of the Volvos, like when you're talking interior design, that's like extra mile. They kind of started a trend. I think other brands have started to follow them. And I recall the previous Polestar, its shifter had embedded in the shifter, there was actually a small crystal, and they laser cut the interior. So the Polestar logo was kind of floating in the middle of it. It was gorgeous.
That's right. That's right. That's right. This one does not have that. So just a little nice leather shifter. The shifter itself, I'm not thrilled with. I find it doesn't kind of, you can engage it obviously, but I always seem to get it into neutral, and then when I go into I have to almost double click it to get it into reverse. It seems to default into neutral when you put it down, and then you have to go an extra step to do reverse. So something you just need to get used to, I suppose.
Okay, yeah. So we've got a question. Nick's got another question, and he's asking. I'm going to make this a two-part question. One is, how's the handling and performance? I mean, with the Polestar 2, it should be a better handling. And what does the Polestar trim of the XC60 compete with?
Okay, so to the first question, it is a Polestar engineered, as I said. Olin dampers, big Akebono brakes. The suspension is fantastic. The handling is very good. I don't think I'd put it up against an AMG possibly in the same class. Although, I mean, again, I think the engine delivery isn't performance oriented as much. It's quick, but I wouldn't say the handling is on par maybe with some of the comparable AMG and possibly the M vehicles from BMW. And the second question, so what is it competing with? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Well, again, probably those trims, the M3s, the AMG Mercedes crossovers, the Audi, I suppose, at some level. It's kind of on its own because it's the hybrid, though.
Yeah. Does it have some hybrid competition coming?
That's a good question.
Mercedes,
I mean, you guys would know. Mercedes, I guess, has their
hybrids on the way as well.
Yes. And I'm assuming those will be performance, but I can't think of, I mean, there probably are some coming, but I don't know it. Thing about plug-in hybrids, from what I've heard from engineers, let's talk about General Motors with the Volt. Those guys, one of the said with the complications with them was it's two complete drive systems. So you've got a lot more working parts between the two. So some automakers are actually trying to make the leap without plugins and going right to EVs. I think from a consumer standpoint, obviously with the gas engine, you take range anxiety out of the equation. So I think plugins almost are a half step to getting to full EVs. But that said, I think you'll see plugins coming out for the next 10 years, if not longer.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah. So you bring up the what do you where do you see the market going? Like, how long do you see plugins being a dominant part of the market, or do you really see people making that leap to EVs?
Well, that's the $1 million question. I mean, Tesla continues to just dominate the EV space. Half the EVs sold in British Columbia last year, which represented 10% of the whole overall market, were Teslas. So I think to grow the EV space, you're just going to have to get a lot more of these full EVs coming to market, which they are. Hybrids, I think, are a great solution for people that maybe will be traveling further afield. But again, when you get 400-kilometer range on an electric, that really suits the bill for most people, apart from a weekend trip somewhere. So I think for security's sake, people do like the hybrids, and maybe a consumer would go from an ICE engine to a hybrid, plug-in hybrid for a few years, and then make the commitment to an EV. But
you go long distance. Didn't you speak to someone who had done quite a long distance trip in an EV?
Yeah, on my first season of Plugged In, Harvey Socher, a Vancouver guy, bought a brand new Audi e-tron and drove it across the country, and then he drove it down through the States to California and back to Vancouver over about a 2-month period. That's not without its challenge. you know, if you need to get there quickly, you have to factor in that you're going to have to do a lot of research in terms of how far can you get, where are you going to stay, where are you going to charge it overnight at a hotel or a motel, or in his case, he even went to an RV camp on one time. So we're not quite there yet for it to be comfortable for people to do that. And I think the charging network is starting to expand, or is expanded. Petro-Canada has gone across with the Trans-Canada, so you do have more chargers, but there is still the time that takes to charge. So it will never, at this point, it does not make an argument to be a better cross-country trip than a gasoline engine.
There's still an occasional car. I know David Booth has also spoken a lot about kind of they're 99% cars, but people still buy 100% cars. They buy cars for every possibility of their lifestyle. So that's kind of something still a bit of a roadblock, isn't it?
I think so. I think the biggest roadblock is education. There's a psychology around it. This range anxiety thing, which I don't think is even a thing anymore because of the ranges they're getting in new vehicles now. There's just a lot of questions people have, and that's one of the reasons I started the podcast, because I'd be going to dinner parties and things, and people who I would never think of would buy an electric vehicle. Suddenly, the first thing they tell me is the next vehicle they're going to buy an electric, and they didn't even really know why. So I think it kind of is it you know, the question is what's the tipping point? I don't know what the tipping point is. But I think it's so top of mind, and I think when you see vehicles by Ford and by Volkswagen and Volvo coming, I think it's on the verge of becoming mainstream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm curious. So with the Plugged In podcast and your chances to sort of meet and talk to new people, who's been one of your favorite or most interesting standout interviews that you've gotten to do as part of the podcast?
Yeah, well, in the first season, so I've done 2 seasons now. We just wrapped season 2. Harvey Socher, the guy with the e-tron. So one thing, just a step back. So I'm approaching this podcast as a journalist. I've been a newspaper journalist for 30 years, into cars for about 20, writing about them. But with a journalism background, what I wanted to do with a podcast, there's a lot of electric vehicle podcasts out there. A lot of them are very advocacy for EVs. You know, what I wanted to do was present a podcast that actually shows the warts of EVs also. You know, some of the issues people have with them, some of the issues the materials getting mined have with them. So approaching it as a journalist, Harvey Socher's story, although it was driving an e-tron across the country, was compelling. The backstory was even more so, and that was his wife of 30 years, who he had planned on doing an EV trip with across the country, passed away from cancer before it. So there was a real emotional backstory. He dedicated it to her. He raised funds for her through it. He continues to do that. Audi Canada really got on board with it. So that was a story that, even though it was just the nuts and bolts were driving electric across the country and back, it had a bigger emotional story to it. And Harvey on the podcast is an emotional guy, and it was fun. I mean, I never thought I'd have that kind of emotion on an EV podcast, so I enjoyed that. Second season, I did an interesting one with a fleet the North Vancouver district, who has 22 Leafs in their fleet, which is very interesting. That's something where you're seeing a lot of EVs start to show up because of the cost savings, obviously. And it was just interesting to hear from their point of view how their employees started fighting over getting in these cars as opposed to not wanting to get them in the beginning, and how some of their employees who drove these cars during their company hours ended up buying electric cars because of the experience. So second season, also a guy talking about battery recycling, which is a huge thing. So second season, I got into more of the kind of policy around EVs, which really is where it's at driving now, is the governance of EVs and the policies around them, governments and grants and incentives and that backstory. And so, you know, it's been fun, and I'm looking forward to season 3 in September, when we launch on all podcast channels and on Driving.ca.
Yeah, what are your aims to cover in season 3? Give us a bit of a preview.
Well, I think, as I say, these new vehicles coming, we'll do a consumer-oriented show or two about these new vehicles once we get a chance to drive them. I think there's going to be huge interest in these vehicles on a lot of reasons. There's EV pickup trucks coming. I've got a great guest scheduled, a Berkeley professor who is like one of the premium battery experts in the world. And, getting back to the warts of EVs, one of the problems with EV batteries is there's not a lot, but cobalt is something that's used in them. And the problem with cobalt is it's mined in Africa, and it's artisanal miners, meaning it's not machine minery, it's human beings that have to go down and get this stuff. And a portion of those miners are kids. So that is not good. And there's a whole movement afoot to start actually, amazingly, using nickel instead of cobalt. So he's going to talk about that. So that will be really fascinating.
Yeah, there's always new discoveries about new battery technology, but the big challenge is producing them in volume. Is there anything like with nickel that's getting closer to being able to be produced in a quantity large enough to support EV proliferation?
Absolutely. This guy says within 2 years, cobalt's going to be gone from these batteries and nickel will have replaced it. And good for the Canadian economy. As anybody knows, up in the Canadian Shield there's lots of nickel. So, yeah. That's an interesting shift. And obviously, with some of these more rare earth minerals that were in the initial EV batteries, the supply chain won't support those as we ramp up production of EVs. So they have to figure out how to make good batteries with abundant minerals.
Okay. That's good. And we're approaching our wrap-up time. Before we sign off, is there anything else interesting about the Volvo XC60 you just want to tell us before we point people off to the review that should be forthcoming in a couple weeks?
Yes. So I've said all the great things about it. I have one complaint, and that is the key fob. That's not a big complaint, but drives me crazy. There's the two sides of the key fob. The buttons are on the side. Drives me crazy. Mazda does it too. I don't get it. I like the button right there.
His recent keys also, they've got buttons down the side, as well as they've got one button that protrudes. The lock button protrudes on the corners, so it's kind of like you can always find the lock button ahead of everything else. Yeah,
I know, but I don't like it. That's my hey, you kids, get off my lawn moment. Second thing about this, everything nice costs a lot of money. That we all know that. But this thing costs $91,000 before taxes.
Well, get outside. Show us the car again. Let's look at it and see if it looks like it's worth $90,000.
All right.
Don't give up on it yet. I don't know. It's one of the very best looking designs in the crossover market. There's not many others that really compare to it. Inside and out, its design is just phenomenal. So
it is,
and it's got a lot of technology in there.
It does.
It's a very, very advanced powertrain, about as advanced as they come. Because even some of the electric powertrains are simpler. But what they've done here with the powertrain, it's like, tell us a little bit more about that. Like how did they manage that? It's a 2-liter engine, right?
Yeah. So they've got a single electric motor, which is kind of unusual. A lot of times, this is an all-wheel drive vehicle too. So it's the electric motor. Also, there's no threshold in speed. A lot of vehicles on all electric mode, once you hit 100K, the electric or the gas engine kicks in. It doesn't happen in this one. You just essentially run the thing until you're out of power. So I think it's very exotic, and I think that's why, again, when you have two drive systems, the price tag just simply goes up, and that is reflected in this vehicle. So the lucky people that do buy it, I think, will love it, but it's a bit of a barrier to entry to the average person.
Yeah, but that's like you said, it's like with electric cars, there's still the range concerns, and this is to some degrees it's a no compromise. It's like it is 100% car. You can go wherever as far as you want without being worried about getting stranded without power or having
Right.
to wait too long for recharge time. So
Right.
it is
And
it looks good, but like you said, that's right. Not a lot of people.
combined fuel economy is about 9.1 liter, and I bet you'd get less than that if you drove it more in electric. You would get less than that.
Especially
So
if you have a daily commute that's within your range. I mean, if you're only commuting like 50 kilometers each day, you're just using 10 kilometers of hybrid power, and the rest is all electric, and that'll really bring your range down. I've had weeks in the Volt where I went completely gas free. So
yeah. So again, it's something that I think once people experience it, I think once you've owned a vehicle like this, you couldn't just go back to a pure gas engine. You'd find like you're giving away something.
Mm-hmm. All right, I think we're going to wrap it up. I'm going to remind our audience to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, subscribe here on YouTube, and click the bell so you get notified whenever we publish a new video or go live like this. And check us out: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and of course, Driving.ca. So I'm Jonathan Yarconi, and I've had Andrew McCredie here. Thank you so much for your time, Andrew.
Thanks, Jonathan. A pleasure.
All right, see you guys soon.